Offline. Oh shit. Oh shit. That is not helping. That is not helping, man. That is not helping.
Unfortunately, you shall be too dead to hear it.
Okay. Oh, what's that note?
Steve, we got a bogey.
Not too long ago, I heard about this upcoming James Gunn movie Brightburn, which seems to be the very first comic book superhero horror movie. And upon hearing about it, there were two things that quickly crossed my mind. Firstly, I was just pissed off at myself because I didn't come up with this concept. But secondly, it also kinda reminded me about some other movie that I've already seen. A very similar comic book superhero movie, also full of very effective horror-like dread and tension and unease. A little MCU movie called Captain America: The Winter Soldier. To be clear, The Winter Soldier isn't actually a horror movie. If you want to be precise and go into semantics, it's a grey-toned political thriller with a bunch of Marvel blockbuster action mixed in. And I don't think I would be going too far by saying that it's one of the strongest MCU entries to date. In fact, it's so strong and so good that it essentially entirely revamped the MCU in a couple different ways. For one, it kind of once and for all disproved the argument of superhero fatigue by once and for all proving that superhero isn't a genre. Because again, this movie isn't just your usual superhero comic book movie. At heart, it's a highly competent political thriller, as competent as political thrillers get. And not only that, it also took this pretty dull, pretty one-dimensional comic book character and turned him into someone that would ultimately become one of the most interesting and overall best characters ever put on film. The question that follows obviously is, how's that possible? How did this one movie manage to accomplish all that? What exactly is its secret? Is it the dynamic camera work? Is it the immersive acting? Is it Black Widow's new haircut? Perhaps. For me, however, the key reason is the reason I brought up Brightburn. For me, the reason Winter Soldier became this highly celebrated and respected film that it's remembered as today is because of its extraordinary ability to evoke the unending feeling of danger and insecurity. And thus, let's get to it. Let's take a closer look at Captain America: The Winter Soldier and its excellent use of danger in order to answer the question of how do you make an effective thriller? How do you effectively evoke the feelings of dread, anxiety, unease, tension, paranoia, and so on so on? How exactly do you make the audience feel unsafe? Like I mentioned, the initial problem with Captain America as a character was the fact that he used to be a very black and white hero in a very black and white world. He always had some clear, obvious bad guy that he could just go ahead and punch as the good guy, which at times could get pretty dull. Oh, evil Nazis are evil. Oh, evil aliens are evil. And so, how did the Winter Soldier fix things? By taking this very black and white hero and setting him in an uncertain gray world where the enemy doesn't have a clear, tangible form. In essence, the main theme of Winter Soldier is about fear and paranoia of the possibility of danger and how it makes humans act in a very unhealthy, destructive way. Something which is instantly made very clear with Nick Fury's story about his grandfather.
You ever get mugged? Every week some punk would say, "What's in the bag?" He'd show him. Bunch of crumpled ones and a loaded .22 Magnum. Your granddad loved people, but he didn't trust them very much.
If you pay attention, you'll notice that this entire film is practically built around this atmosphere of an invisible danger. There's always a sense of wrong, there's always a sense of threat, we just can't pinpoint what it is or where it's coming from. Sometimes it's more subtle than other times, but it's always very effective. Someone's blocking Fury's access to these secret files. The Winter Soldier is a ghost that can be anywhere at any time. Zola's super secret algorithm apparently can control all of human life. Oh Jesus, where'd that bullet just come from? In of itself, this is already great, but the one thing that boosts all of it even further is the fact that our protagonist is completely unfit to operate in a world without a tangible villain. Like, here we have Captain America, whose defining trait is to run to the bad guy and then fight them. And now, all of a sudden, he can't do that. He fights a bunch of pirates, but turns out they were just hired by someone else. He fights the Winter Soldier, but it's still just a man in a mask working for some other unknown entity. He fights a bunch of SHIELD agents, but only because he was made into a fugitive. He fights and he fights and he fights, but it doesn't get him anywhere because he doesn't even know who he's supposed to be fighting. Essentially, he's made to feel completely powerless, which in turn makes the audience feel completely unsafe and vulnerable. Because how could we ever possibly survive a threat that we can't see or identify? If you want a perfect analogy to encapsulate what I'm talking about, look no further than the Fury attack scene.
Fracture detected. DC Metro Police Dispatch shows no units in this area.
This scene, without a doubt, is one of the most tense and overall most marvelous scenes in the MCU, simply because it's built entirely around the fear of the unknown. We don't know who the attackers are, we don't know what they're gonna do, we don't know what they want, we don't know why they want it. All we do know is that they're not police and that whatever they want, it's nothing good. And what makes it also much worse is the fact that we can't do anything about it. We have zero control. Much like Fury, we can only wait and see what ungodly horrors will be unleashed upon us. After more than an hour, we finally do find a face to the villain in form of Hydra, which then turns this into more of an action movie. But up until that point, we have nothing. We're out in the open, we're out of our comfort zone, just like Captain America, which means that up until that point, all we can really do is worry. In addition to the villain side, the second level of dread and anxiety of Winter Soldier is generated from the ally side. In the past, Captain America was always established as a crowd-oriented being who was always surrounded by friendly, reliable faces. Whether it's his squad in World War II or the Avengers in modern day, he always had a safety net of allies by his side that he could always trust and rely on. And so, what does this movie do? It yanks that safety net away and places Cap in a world where trust basically doesn't exist, something which again is made very clear right away.
Oh, this is awkward.
You just can't stop yourself from lying, can you?
I didn't lie. Agent Romanoff had a different mission than yours.
Which you didn't feel obliged to share. Those hostages could have died, Nick. Soldiers trust each other. That's what makes it an army.
On a quick look, you might notice that Cap in this film is once again surrounded by a bunch of familiar and or friendly faces. But the thing is, this time he can't trust any of them, because pretty much every character is established to be a liar. He can't trust Black Widow, he can't trust Nick Fury, he can't trust the officials, he can't trust his team, he can't trust his own highly respected superior. I mean, goddamn, he can't even trust his nice normal neighbor to be a nice normal neighbor.
Captain, I'm Agent 13, SHIELD Special Service.
Kate?
To be accurate, there is one person that Cap can fully trust, which is Peggy Carter. The problem is, she's now an elderly woman with amnesia, so it's not like she's gonna be too much of a help. Ironically, it gets to the point where the person Cap can rely on the most is the person he knows the least. The reason why removing the safety net of friendship is so crucial and effective is kind of twofold. Firstly, it forces Cap to grow into becoming his own person who makes his own decisions, regardless of rank or flags or insignias. Secondly, and more importantly, it creates a never-ending sense of uncomfortable loneliness. Because when you combine untrustworthy friends with an invisible enemy, you get a world where nowhere feels safe. Because now we not only have to worry about attacks coming from the front and the sides, but also from behind. The feeling of which is best summed up with this elevator scene.
Sorry about what happened with Fury. Messed up what happened to him.
Thank you.
Just like the car attack scene, I'd argue that this elevator ride is one of the most nerve-wracking and overall marvelous moments in the MCU. Because once again, it's built entirely around the factor of uncertainty. Like, this is Cap's team, but is it really? Can he really trust them? Are they really just using the elevator, or is there something bad about to happen? That right there is the definition of anxiety. After we find out that Hydra is the real villain, that's when Cap learns to be cautious about who he chooses to trust, which then leads us to civil war. But before that moment, he has nobody. He and the audience can trust nobody. Not his team, not his friends, nobody. I mean, we can't even trust death in this movie. Pretty much the only thing you can trust are these laser cutter things that will 100% get you out of any sticky situation, but that's about it. Everything else quite possibly, quite probably, might be out to get you. So better start working on those fingernails.
Who do you want me to be?
How about a friend?
Well, there's a chance you might be in the wrong business, Rogers.
Building tension and dread by limiting information like we talked about, very effective. Unfortunately, there's also one potentially very big downside to it. The fact that when you keep a bunch of information hidden from the audience, you pretty much always at some point have to resort to exposition to deliver that vital missing information to them. Exposition in essence meaning characters explaining stuff purely for the sake of the audience being able to understand it. It's a challenge in most complex political thrillers, it's a challenge in The Winter Soldier. The reason I call this movie one of the best MCU entries instead of the best MCU entry, it's because of this. I'm not saying this is a problem for everyone, but when you get more into writing, you start to pick up on exposition more easily, for better or worse. And when I say this movie has exposition, I mean it has a truckload of exposition.
Target is a mobile satellite launch platform, the Lemurian Star. George Batroc, ex-DGSE, Action Division. He's at the top of Interpol's Red Notice.
These new long-range precision guns can eliminate 1,000 hostiles a minute. The satellites can read a terrorist's DNA.
Best friends since childhood. Bucky Barnes and Stephen Rogers were inseparable.
The ones that do call him the Winter Soldier. He's credited with over 24 assassinations in the last 50 years.
Zola's algorithm evaluates people's past to predict their future.
Bucky's whole unit was captured in 43. Zola experimented on him.
We need to breach those carriers and replace their targeting blades with our own.
One or two won't cut it. We need to link all three carriers.
To be fair though, exposition like this isn't too much of an issue, because it is pretty brief and sparse. It's not great, but it's fine. The real problems begin with so-called exposition dumps, meaning when you've kept vital information from the audience for so long, intentionally or unintentionally, that you ultimately arrive at a scene where you absolutely have to unload all of that information on the audience at the same time, in one big dump. A great example of this is the fourth Die Hard movie.
He's like, here's the problem, Kev. We've been shooting this movie for 3 months. Every time we have a problem on the movie, every time we hit a plot hole, something that doesn't make sense, all we've been saying is, you know what, we'll put it in the Warlock scene. Because this is our big expositional scene where we can talk about shit and reveal the villain's motives and shit like that, and handle a bunch of things that we haven't handled because we've been blowing shit up.
Just tell us what you know about Thomas Gabriel, all right? That's why we came here. Thomas Gabriel.
In Winter Soldier, there's a very similar big exposition dump scene, the villain reveal. In this one scene, there's a massive crap ton of incredibly vital information that has to be explained to the audience all at once. It has to explain that Hydra is not only alive, but also that it has infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. Then it has to explain what Hydra's goal is exactly and what steps it has taken to achieve it. Then it has to explain that Dr. Zola from the first movie was among these key Hydra infiltrators. And if that wasn't already enough, then it also has to introduce Zola's algorithm that connects to Project Insight.
What's on this drive?
Project Insight requires insight. So I wrote an algorithm.
What kind of algorithm? What does it do?
Just tell us what you know about Thomas Gabriel, all right? That's why we came here.
Overall, this scene is a recipe for disaster. This is a scene that would single-handedly ruin most movies. You tell a writer to write this scene and their first reaction will be to go into depression, because there's no way to make this scene work. And yet, somehow, it does work. How does it work? Because it is built exclusively around what we've been talking about. The unending and highly effective insecure feeling of tension and danger and dread and anxiety and so on. The bare bones version of this scene is that Captain America and Black Widow open up a flash drive to find out what they need to know. And so, how do the writers add danger and tension to a scene like that? Well, firstly, they set it in a dark old super secret military basement. Secondly, they have the information be delivered audibly by a creepy ancient sentient computer. Thirdly, they make that sentient computer computer be the now dead evil doctor from the first movie. Fourthly, they then focus heavily on the impending takeover by Hydra and cut to raw rapid-fire clips along with creepy music. Or from the audience's perspective, it's like this. What is this place? Jesus Christ, it's a talking machine. No, there's no way. Hydra was destroyed. They were destroyed. Oh shit, now there's a fucking missile coming in. In other words, you're sitting there being force-fed information for 4 full minutes and you're so caught up that you mostly don't even realize it. That is great writing. That is great editing. That is great filmmaking. That's what makes this scene work. That's what makes this movie fantastic. Again, there's a lot of positives you can say about this movie, but this one thing always stands out. The film's simply extraordinary use of dread and tension. Well, you get it.